The sun shone brightly in Scottsdale, Arizona, reflecting off the immaculate windows of Sun Valley Motors. Jack Reynolds adjusted his red hat as he stepped out of his car, his shoes clicking on the hot asphalt. The air carried the scent of fresh coffee from a nearby coffee shop, mixed with the distinct smell of dry earth. Jack walked into the dealership, where a row of gleaming vehicles stood in perfect order, each polished to a mirror-like shine. He was dressed simply, a bright blue shirt, pressed pants, and smart shoes. His hat, however, stood out like a beacon. It wasn't just an accessory, it was a statement. Jack knew it might provoke strong reactions, but he wasn't there to discuss politics or buy a car. His mission was to observe how this store, a small but crucial part of his business, treated its customers. Opening the red doors, Jack was greeted by a whiff of air conditioning and the scent of new leather. The showroom was immaculate, almost clinical. Salespeople talked to customers, showing wide, practiced smiles. For a moment, no one noticed his presence. Jack scanned the room, his eyes landing on a black sports car that gleamed under the lights. Finally, a young salesman with nervous energy approached. "Good morning, sir. Looking for anything in particular today?" Jack smiled, replying, "Just looking around for now." Before the conversation could move forward, a sharp voice interrupted. "Excuse me, Jeremy. I'll take care of this." Jack turned to see a man approaching. It was Steve Harrison, the manager. His appearance was impeccable, but his eyes revealed a hint of irritation when he saw Jack's hat. "Sir?" Steve began, his tone polite but cold. "We have a policy of prioritizing customers who align with our dealership's values." Jack raised an eyebrow, asking, "And how do you know I'm not serious?" Steve hesitated, but maintained his composure. "It's just a policy. We have to prioritize customers who align with our dealership's values." Jack held Steve's gaze for a moment, his expression unwavering. "Interesting politics," he said calmly, before turning his attention to the cars, ignoring the tension in the air. Steve followed Jack, his demeanor growing colder with every step. Jack moved deliberately, stopping to admire the luxury sedans and SUVs lined up beneath the bright lights of the showroom. He appeared calm, but the tension in Steve's posture was palpable. "Sir?" Steve said, stopping directly in Jack's path. "I'm going to have to ask you to leave." Jack paused, tilting his head slightly. "Leave? And why?" Steve crossed his arms. "It's obvious you're not here to make a purchase. We prefer to maintain an environment that aligns with the values of our clientele." He added, looking directly at Jack's hat, "Your attire does not reflect the image we seek." The room fell silent. A few employees exchanged uncertain glances, while a couple who had been joking near the corner seemed suddenly interested in the exchange of words. Jack noticed the change, but his expression remained unchanged. "I see," he replied, his voice steady. "And what is that image?" Steve hesitated for a split second, then straightened, lowering his voice. "We cater to a more progressive, inclusive clientele. We try to avoid political distractions." Jack gave a soft smile, nodding. "Progressive and inclusive, huh? Except for people who think differently." Steve narrowed his eyes, his face flushing slightly. "Sir, this isn't a debate. I'm asking you to leave. If you'd like, I can recommend another store that might be a better option." Jack studied Steve for a long moment, then glanced around the room. The young salesman who had initially approached him, Jeremy, stood near the front of the showroom, looking uncomfortable. Several other employees avoided eye contact. Without another word, Jack turned and walked toward the door. The silence in the room was heavy as he pushed open the glass doors and stepped out into the sunlight. Steve adjusted his hair, trying to regain his composure as he got back to work. "Okay, let's get back to work," he said, his voice tense. But there was a hint of uncertainty in his voice, as if he knew the meeting wasn't over. Outside, Jack leaned against his car, the sun glinting off his hair. He hesitated for a moment before getting in and driving away. The afternoon sun beat down on the streets of Scottsdale as Jack's car pulled away into traffic. Inside the store, however, the atmosphere was less bright. Steve Harrison walked back into his office, his clear words sinking into the air like static. The rest of the team continued working, but the energy in the room was tense. Jeremy, the young salesman, fidgeted behind a desk, periodically glancing at the showroom floor. Meanwhile, Jack was not far away. Parking his car at a nearby cafe, he decided to do something that had always been encouraged in his corporate philosophy: observe. Grabbing a coffee, he positioned himself at a hidden table with a clear view of the store. Inside, the interaction between employees grew more forceful by the minute. Steve made his managerial rounds, interrupting a few forced smiles with customers and giving orders to employees. At one point, Jeremy approached him hesitantly, clearly nervous. "Sir," Jeremy began, keeping his voice low. "Was it really necessary to ask that gentleman to leave?" He seemed. Steve cut him off, his expression straining. "Let me stop you right there, Jeremy. People like him aren't our target audience. If you want to get anywhere here, you need to understand the type of clientele we prioritize. Is that clear?" Jeremy's face paled as he nodded quickly. "Yes, sir." The exchange didn't go unnoticed by a few other employees who whispered amongst themselves when Steve wasn't looking. It was clear that not everyone agreed with the manager's approach, but none of them had the courage to challenge him. Back at the cafe, Jack took another sip of his coffee, the bitterness complementing his thoughts. His years in the corporate world had taught him a lot about leadership, but that moment struck a personal chord. The prejudices Steve displayed weren't just about politics. They revealed a lack of professionalism and respect that could corrupt an organization from the inside out. Jack watched for nearly an hour, noting the subtle dynamics. The employees avoided prolonged eye contact with Steve, clearly worried about displeasing him. Customers came and went, most receiving friendly treatment, though there was an air of superficiality to the interactions. This was a showroom that valued image above all else, a value Jack found disturbing. As the sun began to set, Jack pulled out his cell phone and made a call. "Darlene, it's me," he said, his tone measured. "Can you schedule a conference call with the regional manager at Sun Valley Motors tomorrow morning? I have a few things to discuss." Darlene, his longtime assistant, didn't miss a beat. "Sure, Mr. Reynolds. Is there anything else you need?" Jack glanced back at the store one last time before starting the car. "Just make sure they're prepared for some tough questions." The call ended and Jack drove away, leaving behind a building that looked far more fragile than it appeared. The next day arrived with a different kind of heat, not from the sun but from the dry tension at Sun Valley Motors. Jack had intentionally kept his schedule light, knowing that today would be a day that would require his full attention. As he prepared for the conference, he couldn't help but reflect on what he had seen. The store wasn't just failing its customers, it was failing its people. At 10:30 a.m., Jack joined the call. The regional manager, Karen Bishop, was as punctual as ever. Her voice was clear and professional. "Good morning, Mr. Reynolds. I understand you wanted to discuss a few observations about Sun Valley Motors." Jack sat back in his chair, his tone calm but deliberate. "Good morning, Karen. I visited the Scottsdale store yesterday as a customer. Let's just say it was enlightening." A brief pause followed. Karen's tone changed slightly, her curiosity evident. "I see. How was your experience?" Jack recounted the events precisely, leaving out none of the details: the manager's dismissal, the refusal of service, and the cultural dynamics he observed. His words were factual, but the weight behind them was impossible to ignore. Karen listened intently, her silence punctuated by the occasional sound of a pencil tapping against paper. When Jack finished, she cleared her throat. "Mr. Reynolds, I'm so sorry to hear about your experience. This behavior is absolutely unacceptable. I will address it immediately." Jack didn't respond right away. He let the moment hang in the air before speaking. "Karen, I need more than an apology. This isn't just about one incident. It's about the culture. What's happening at Sun Valley Motors isn't unique to Scottsdale. It's systemic." Karen hesitated, then sighed. "You're right. We've had complaints about that location before, but nothing this serious. I'm going to initiate a full review of their operations and—" Jack interrupted her smoothly. "That won't be necessary. I'll handle this personally. I want to see how they respond when the CEO walks through the door. Not as an outsider, but as their leader. I'll be there this afternoon. Make sure they're prepared." Karen nodded, though her voice held a mixture of relief and apprehension. Jack ended the call, his resolve stronger than ever. He wasn't just going to confront Steve Harrison. He was going to set a standard for what the company stood for. At 3 p.m., Jack's car pulled into the parking lot again. This time, he strode through the doors without hesitation, his hat still in place, but his posture unexpectedly commanding. The staff looked up, their expressions ranging from confusion to panic. Jeremy stopped mid-conversation, his face a picture of disbelief. Steve was the last to notice Jack's arrival. He walked out of his office with his usual air of confidence, only to stop dead in his tracks when he saw Jack. His face paled, realization slowly but surely sinking in. "Mr. Reynolds," Steve stammered, his earlier bravado gone in an instant. I didn't realize." Jack didn't let him finish. "Let's talk in your office," he said, his voice firm but firm. "Now." The team watched in embarrassed silence as Jack followed Steve into the office, closing the door behind them. The air in the office was thick with speculation, but no one dared say a word. Inside, Jack took a seat behind Steve's desk, his expression calm but irresistible. "Do you know why I'm here?" he asked. Steve pulled back, his hands fidgeting nervously. I suppose it was yesterday." Jack leaned back a little. "Yeah, and it's about a lot more than that." Steve shifted uncomfortably in his seat, the weight of Jack's presence pressing down on him. "Mr. Reynolds," he began, his voice shaking a little, "I suppose this isn't how we normally operate. Yesterday was an exception." Jack's eyes narrowed, his calm demeanor giving way to a harder front. "An exception? That's an interesting choice of words, Steve, because what I saw was not an exception. It was a reflection of how this office is run." Steve opened his mouth to respond, but Jack held up a hand, stopping him. "Let me make something very clear. I have spent decades building this company not just as a business, but as a standard of excellence. What I saw yesterday, your behavior, your attitude toward a potential client, was not just unprofessional. It was a complete betrayal of those values." Steve's face turned red. "I didn't know who you were," he stammered, desperation rising in his voice. "If I had, I would never have." Jack cut him off firmly. "And that's exactly the problem. It shouldn't matter who I am. Every person who walks through these doors deserves respect, no matter what they look like, what they wear, or what you think of them." Steve stared at his hands, unable to meet Jack's gaze. The silence spread between them, heavy and irresistible. Jack leaned back in his chair, his tone suffering a little, but losing none of its gravity. "Do you know what your actions cost this store yesterday? Not just financially, but reputationally. You didn't just alienate me. You alienated every employee who saw what you did and every customer who felt the tension in that room." Steve finally looked up, his face a mixture of shame and defiance. "With all due respect, sir, I was trying to maintain the image of this store. We have a reputation to protect." Jack leaned forward, his face a mask of shame and defiance. "A reputation isn't built on exclusion, Steve. It's built on integrity. And yesterday you showed none." The room went silent again, the tension almost palpable. Jack let the moment pass before continuing. "Effective immediately, you are relieved of your duties. Karen Bishop will oversee the transition until a new manager is named." Steve's eyes widened in shock. "You're firing me? Just like that?" Jack stood, his expression resolute. "This isn't just about you, Steve. It's about setting a standard for everyone else. This company doesn't tolerate discrimination, and it certainly doesn't tolerate arrogance masquerading as leadership." Steve sank back into his chair, his face bright. Jack stopped at the door, but paused before leaving. "One more thing," he said, looking back. "Take this as a lesson. Wherever you go, remember, respect is not optional. It's the foundation of any successful business and any decent human being." Without waiting for a response, Jack left the office, leaving Steve slumped under the weight of his actions. In the viewing room, the staff looked up as Jack appeared, their faces a mix of curiosity and hope. Jack addressed them directly, his voice firm and commanding. "I want all of you to know one thing. This operation and this company are about respect, professionalism, and excellence. If any of you feel that those values are not being upheld, you have my direct line. I expect nothing less than your full commitment to those principles. Jeremy, standing near the front, looked particularly relieved. Jack gave him a small wave before heading out the door. As Jack stepped out into the bright Arizona light, he felt a sense of purpose. The store would recover. More importantly, the lessons learned here would spread throughout the company, ensuring that no customer, no matter who they were, would ever be treated that way again. Word of the manager change spread quickly among employees. Stunned looks and exchanges of glances filled the air as the team began to process what had happened. For some, it was a moment of vindication, a long-awaited correction to a toxic environment. For others, it was a stark reminder that no one was above accountability. Ultimately, Karen Bishop arrived at the store to meet with employees. Standing in the center of the room, she addressed them with a mixture of empathy and firmness. Today marks a turning point for this store, she began. We're here to rebuild, to focus on what matters most, our customers and each other. This isn't just about making sales. It's about creating an environment of respect, trust, and professionalism. Her words resonated with Jeremy, who had spent the last few hours replaying the events of the past few days in his mind. He stepped forward, hesitant but determined. I'd like to say something, he said, his voice steady despite his nerves. Karen nodded, encouraging him to speak. Jeremy took a deep breath. I've been working here for over a year, and I saw for the first time how Steve's attitude affected everyone, customers and employees. Yesterday was difficult to watch, but seeing Mr. Reynolds come in like that gave me hope that things can change. Karen smiled gently, her approval clear. Thank you, Jeremy. Change starts with people like you, those willing to stand up and hold the line when things go wrong. Over the next few weeks, the company underwent significant changes. Karen implemented a series of training sessions focused on customer service, cultural sensitivity, and team collaboration. Employees began connecting in ways they hadn't before, breaking down barriers that Steve's leadership had strengthened. Jeremy emerged as a natural leader among his peers. His willingness to stand up for what was right didn't go unnoticed, and Karen took him under her wing, mentoring him in the principles of management. In the months that followed, Jeremy was promoted to assistant manager, a role he approached with humility and determination. Meanwhile, Steve's dismissal sent shockwaves through the company. Other stores in the chain took notice, adopting an initiative led by Jack that introduced break rooms, town halls, and anonymous feedback channels, ensuring that every employee, from entry-level to executive, felt heard and valued. As for Jack, he continued his unannounced visits to stores across the country, each time reinforcing the values that had led to his success. Though his interactions varied, the lesson remained the same. Every customer mattered, every employee mattered, and respect was non-negotiable. One afternoon, months after the incident, Jack returned to Sun Valley Motors. This time, the atmosphere was completely different. The staff greeted him with obvious confidence and camaraderie. Jeremy greeted him with a firm handshake and a genuine smile. Mr. Reynolds, it's good to see you again. Jack smiled, his eyes scanning the showroom. It looks like things are going well. Jeremy nodded. Thank you. Your actions set the tone for all of us. The conversation was brief, but the impact remained. When Jack left the store that day, he felt a profound sense of accomplishment. The experience had been a reminder of the power of leadership, not just to correct mistakes, but to inspire change. The events at Sun Valley Motors became more than just a corporate anecdote. They evolved into a profound lesson in leadership, humanity, and the consequences of unexpected bias. Jack Reynolds, a man who built his empire on principles of respect and fairness, reminded everyone at his company that these values were not just slogans. They were the foundation of success. Word of the incident spread beyond the store, inspiring conversations in the broader business community. Articles were written about the power of quiet leadership, and Jack's actions became a case study in how to deal with workplace toxicity without resorting to theatrics or public vilification. He showed that accountability could be firm but respectful, corrective but compassionate. For the employees at Sun Valley Motors, the lesson went beyond work. Many of them began to reflect on their own biases and how they interacted with others. Jeremy, now an assistant manager, often found himself coaching new employees on the importance of treating each customer as the most important person in the room. His approach wasn't just about making sales. It was about making connections. For Steve, his departure from the company was a turning point in his life. The months following his dismissal were humiliating. He sought counsel, attended leadership seminars, and worked to rebuild his reputation in smaller roles. While the path to redemption was not easy, it forced him to confront his own biases and reconsider what leadership really meant. The effects of Jack's intervention also expanded to clients. Sun Valley Motors gained a reputation as a store where everyone was welcome, regardless of who they were or what they believed. Sales improved, employee satisfaction increased, and the Scottsdale store became a model for others to follow. In the end, the story wasn't just about a manager's bad decision or a CEO's silent authority. It was about the choices we make every day, choices to listen, to respect, to stand up for what is right even when it is inconvenient, and the willingness to extend grace to those who want to change. Jack's hat, once a symbol of division in that room, has become a symbol of something much greater. The power of humility, respect, and the belief that everyone, regardless of their role or appearance, deserves to be treated with dignity. As Jack often says in his talks to employees and partners, success isn't about the cars we sell or the profits we make. It's about the people we touch and the values we uphold, because at the end of the day, that's what really drives us. If you like this video and it added something to you, watch the next one. The next video will add more value to you. Don't forget to like it, your comment is very important, subscribe to the channel, and recommend this video to a friend.